big picture battleground issue, incumbency. Is it the advantage that many think it is cracked up to be? Consider this. Since the last federal election in 2011, the incumbent won provincial elections in Newfoundland, PEI, Ontario, Manitoba, Saskatchewan, Alberta, British Columbia. It didn't matter the party. But since last fall, we've seen two incumbents stumble and fall. Darrell Dexter's NDP government in Nova Scotia, he lost. And this month, of course, Quebecers threw out Pauline Marois' PQ government. So, should incumbents be nervous? Take a look at the polls. Incumbent PC Premier David Alward faces New Brunswick voters this fall. He's way behind in the polls. Rob Ford faces voters in Toronto, and he's way behind in the polls. And of course, think of Stephen Harper, who will face voters next fall in 2015, and any number of polls show him behind or at the very best tied with the Liberals for more than a year. So, are Canadian voters ready to consider changing political leadership? Let's kick that one around with our pollster, David Coletto, CEO of Advocates Data. And I was thinking about this as I thought about what does Quebec mean and what does Nova Scotia mean for the rest of the country. Is there some grand unifying theory what we can kick around? So I'm saying the incumbents, they had a good, strong run, but some better be worried. You've taken a look at what I'm talking about here and slightly different variation.
Well, no, I think you're on the, I think the trends you're describing is accurate, and I actually think the outcomes are probably true, that voters in all of those provinces you mentioned and federally in 2011 looked at the options, looked at the incumbent, maybe wasn't extremely happy in all cases with that incumbent, but chose to re-elect them.
One thing I should point out, that all those elections are coming right off the heels of the fiscal crisis,
yes.
And every single incumbent had a variation of the same theme to voters. It's the economy is fragile, it's too risky, my opponent is too risky, don't take a chance. And for whatever reason, that resonated until we get to Darrell Dexter.
Yeah, and I think there's one of the reasons why we may start to see incumbents fall is that voters might be getting more upset or that urge for change might be growing, especially in the cases of we're likely to go in an Ontario election. Mm-hmm. This is a government that's now almost 3 full terms into its mandate. BC, we saw that desire for change was very strong, and yet Christy Clark pulled it off. I don't know if that's going to necessarily be true but it's a similar example.
But she and Alison Redford, Clark and Alison Redford, same deal. Way behind in the polls. We all know this story, right? But they did such an effective job of campaigning against opponents saying, not ready for primetime Wild Rose, and then Dix had the Kinder Morgan flip-flop.
What I was trying to say, stumbling over my words there, was I think the opposition parties might learn something from all those incumbent wins, right? Because in almost every case where a fairly unpopular incumbent won, it's because one or both of the opposition parties stumbled. So we can look at Tim Hudak in Ontario, Danielle Smith in Alberta, Adrian Dixon, British Columbia. All of those 3 opposition leaders should have been primed to become premier, should have won those elections. And I think what you may see in Nova Scotia, the strategy that Stephen McNeil took was play it safe, appear stable, appear friendly, appear safe as an alternative, and voters, if they want change, will look at you. And if you look at the strategy that Andrea Horwath's playing in Ontario, it's very similar. It's middle of the road. We're not going to support risky minimum wage increases, which you would think is a fundamental NDP issue, and we're going to appear safe. You like me, and if you want change, if you think Kathleen Wynne and Liberals need to be thrown out, I'm going to be the safe choice. So I think, and that's what Philippe Couillard really presented to voters in Quebec as well, was this safe, not controversial to anyone really, and certainly the PQ did themselves no favors.
Well, the one election through that period where incumbents were winning, where the incumbent didn't win, was Jean Charest. Right. But in that case, he way overachieved against the polls at 0.7 of the popular votes, and he too had a message of stability. Now, you took a look at some data about how voters were satisfied or unsatisfied, and looked at those elections and some interesting sort of observations.
So all these numbers are from post-election surveys right after the election that were done. And if we put up the first board, these were the 3 provinces where the incumbents overwhelmingly won re-election: in Newfoundland and Labrador, Manitoba, and Saskatchewan, right? And you ask voters who voted in that election, how satisfied are you with the government? You can see overwhelming numbers. Now, in Newfoundland and Labrador, the Progressive Conservatives didn't get 75% of the vote, but they did get almost 60%.
Mm-hmm. They got the majority. They got the majority in Manitoba, Selinger, and Brad Wall.
Right. So here's a case where the incumbent went in, they were safe. It really didn't matter if the alternatives were effective or not. The government was going to get reelected. But let's go to the next board and look at those 5 elections, I think, where we actually had a majority of the population saying they were not satisfied with their government. So in Ontario, it was almost 50-50. In Alberta, 50-50, right? In both those cases, although in Ontario it was a minority government, you saw the incumbent get reelected, despite the fact that at the beginning of the campaign, we saw large numbers of voters saying province wasn't on the right track, the government didn't deserve to get reelected, but over the course of the campaign, the incumbents effectively made the argument that they were better and that maybe voters should be satisfied because the alternative won't be any better.
Not to kick this one around, but particularly in BC and Alberta, all the more reason to be surprised at the results, because if you'd seen these numbers before the election and knowing what you're tracking in the horse race, you'd say, well, the horse race is probably going to be correct. And yet, voters just were not ready to go. So thinking ahead,
yes,
let's take the Harper government, 2015. They may be able to bet saying, we don't need to have a majority of Canadians satisfied with the way we've run things. We just got to make sure that the majority think the alternative is unacceptable. The alternative being Thomas Mulcair or Justin Trudeau.
That's right. And if you look at the numbers, you ask Canadians, do you approve or disapprove of the Harper government? It's about low 30s now. So that's not enough.
That's getting a
if
little too
only
low.
those people come out and vote Conservative, they might win a minority, but it's not enough to get their majority back. So over the course of the campaign and leading up into that campaign, they've got, there's a two-pronged strategy for them. And it worked for Christy Clark, and it worked for Alison Redford in the final days of the campaign, and that's, we're focused on the issue you care most about, which is the economy. And 2, the other guys, Tom Mulcair's policies and Justin Trudeau's maybe experience or competence, can't get the job done. Go with what you know. I think that's the only way that they probably can pull it out, considering how well known Stephen Harper is. You can't change his persona. You can't change his image. And
for better,
they've
for
got
worse,
to hope
that's what
that Justin Trudeau trips into that trap they've sent for him. If not, Trudeau looks really good because people like him, despite the fact he doesn't have the experience, and a majority of voters in Canada want change.
Yeah, and boom, double whammy. All right, David Coletto, thank you so much. Appreciate it.